Okay, we are now live, Chair.
Thank you very much. So welcome everybody to CYP Scrutiny Board, 6th of June 2022. Welcome to the members and people who are attending the meeting to do presentations to us, and anybody who's choosing not to watch the tennis and is watching us this evening. It will be much more interesting than Nadal or Kyrgios. Is that the name of the gentleman with the interesting way of dealing with things on court? End of that. On to the meeting. Do we have any substitutes nominated this evening, Lauren?
None received, Chair.
Oh, I see a shake of the head there, thank you. Can I remind members of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests that they may have in relation to items on this agenda, either now or when it comes up if it's appropriate? Anything to declare at this point? Haven't heard anything, so we'll move on, thank you. Admission of the public. It's not recommended to exclude the public from this meeting for the items on this agenda, so you're all welcome to listen in. And the first major agenda item is the minutes of the last meeting, which was the 8th of June 2022. We just need to agree them as being a correct record. Does anybody have any members who are at the last meeting have any comments or alterations to make? Please shout or forever hold your peace on the subject. So I can't see anybody. So can we accept those minutes as a record of the last meeting? Thank you very much. So let's move swiftly on to the meat of the meeting. This is the Calderdale Healthy Schools Award item, which I think is going to be led by Ben for the officers. And I believe we also have two head teachers who were involved in the talking this thing through. Ben, I don't know whether you want the heads to kick off, or what do you want to? What do you think?
Thank you, Chair. Actually, my colleague Naomi's going to lead this. You've all heard far too much from me over the years, so Naomi's going to probably do a much better job than I will. So I'll hand you over to her if that's okay.
Yes, okay, fine. Away you go then, Naomi.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Chair. We've actually only got one head teacher with us now, unfortunately. The other head teacher has been landed with an Ofsted inspection, which is obviously and unfortunately have to take priority. She is still in an Ofsted meeting as we speak.
Right. Good luck to her.
As you say, yeah, we've been asked to update the board this evening on the development of a local healthy schools programme, and I thought it'd be really useful to bring along somebody who's been involved right from the outset in shaping that. Lorraine, do you just want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Louie and Bamford, head teacher of Whippingdon Junior and Infant School. As Naomi said, I've been involved in the working party right from the get-go, which was around March time.
Welcome aboard, Lorraine. Thank you for joining us. Interested to hear what you have to say. Thank you. Please carry on.
Thank you. Hopefully you'll have had a chance to have a look at the papers that accompany this agenda item. So the draft framework for our healthy schools model for primary schools, and the report and slide pack that I put together. So rather than me spending a lot of time going over the nitty gritty and the detail of that, what I thought would be most useful to do is give you a bit of an overview of why we are where we are, and then to hand over to the board for questions and any comments and suggestions for the framework for the programme.
Sounds good to me, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so in a nutshell, the development of a healthy schools model in Calderdale has actually formed a really key aspect of our COVID recovery work. So it's something that we talked about pre-COVID. So there was a national healthy schools model some years ago that had its successes and also had some challenges that came with it. A lot of local authorities have carried on with a healthy schools model in their local areas after that national programme came to an end. Some of them still very closely aligned to the national model, and others that had flexed and moved away from that. following the COVID pandemic and our very close working with schools, actually, I think it really came to the fore just how important our schools and our settings are in, and whole school communities actually, in supporting children and young people and supporting families. So what we wanted to do was really create and facilitate a system that better supported them to do that. Although this has been a public health led piece of work, the reality is that it's been about partnership and co-production right from the outset. So we started developing the framework in March, just as the COVID pandemic started to quieten down a little bit. And we involved primary schools and secondary schools, so senior leadership teams and health and wellbeing leads from primary and secondary schools. Education colleagues from within the local authority were involved heavily, and also subject specialists from across the local health system. And that was really important for me that we did that, so that what we developed was something that would meet a need and would actually work for Calderdale's people and Calderdale's places, you know, recognising everything that Calderdale is. So the model itself and the framework itself, there are some sort of key parts of that I'd like to just draw your attention to. So child and how important that is, and it encourages schools to work with pupils and with students to develop solutions and to really try and meet their needs, and also to work with families and with parents and carers to do that. It tries to and hopefully will facilitate shared learning and mutual support between schools. We know that lots of schools are doing lots of fantastic things, and they're often not given the opportunity to really learn from each other. So that shared learning and mutual aid is really a key part of the model, and hopefully it's that will make it a sustainable solution. So it really encourages schools to work together on that whole health and wellbeing agenda. It takes a whole settings approach, aiming to influence the sort of the whole ethos and culture of the school and the school community, to really take that health promoting approach. And in doing all of that, we hope that it will contribute towards the council objective around reducing inequalities, and also the wellbeing strategy priority outcome for children and young people to have hope and aspiration. You know, really recognising how important the school community is in supporting children, and how important health and wellbeing in childhood is to future life chances, and doing everything that we can really as a system to support children and to support families. And before I stop talking, I just wanted to give you a really tangible example of one of the bits of the framework that we've really worked closely with other people, and hopefully that will exemplify how the whole model has been created. So the food domain of our Healthy Schools framework, the initial draft criteria in those food domains for both silver and for gold, if you've had a look at the framework, were drawn up by Glyn Eastwood and Fiona Black at Halifax Academy. Halifax Academy do some fantastic work around food, around school food, and around supporting their local community with food, not just in terms of nutrition, but in terms of sustainability. And that was something that was really, really important to us in terms of climate emergency. So they did that first draft in terms of, you know, best practice and what works for them. We then shared that with the two working groups to look at, okay, this is how it works for Halifax Academy. Can all of this equally work for other schools, or are the bits of it that there are system barriers or cost barriers, facilities that mean that some bits aren't quite going to work? So we had some further shaping then. Becky Greenwood, who I know is on this call but not feeling so well tonight, helped to shape the food domain as well. Becky's got a really keen interest in food and nutrition and food sustainability, so she put some real expert input into that domain as well. And then we had involvement from the Calderdale Food Network, from Anya, who sits on the Calderdale Food Network, and also from Myra James and Liz Riedel at Feed Our Future. So it really has been a whole local system, and really drawing on local expertise and local knowledge to try and put a framework together that will work Calderdale, so that we can do the very best that we can do as professionals to support children and support families. I wonder if there's anything that Councillor Courtney would like to add as our portfolio holder.
Thanks, Naomi. Not really, because you've done an excellent job there. I think just the fact that, you know, we're really interested in looking at the health of individual children, but more the sort of the health of the whole sort of population of all schools, all school children and school communities, really. So I think it's about that sort of holistic look within schools, and then the holistic look across the borough. Because I think if we can get children and young people, and if we can get the whole school to be working in a healthy way, and with so many different strands to that, then that will actually be a really positive a positive sort of continuation of the sort of starting well, the continuing, the developing well strands for our well-being strategy. So I think the idea is about looking at this very holistically, and if we can get some good things, good habits formed for children and young people in schools, and that will actually help us to continue on through through adulthood. And sometimes I think these sort of things they're difficult, a little bit difficult to measure, and they're a little bit difficult to measure in terms of the outcomes and sort of things. However, I think long-term public health is it's generational, isn't it? Sort of in terms of when we sort of see results and everything. So it's not always the easiest thing to measure it on a short-term thing. But I think this is such I'm really positive, feel really positively about this as a piece of work and as a thing going forward.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sarah. I'm just wondering also, Lorraine, you've joined us this evening and you were obviously heavily involved in this. Is there something you would like to add at this stage?
Yeah, I think just to echo what Naomi said, really, I sort of coordinated, organised the national healthy schools in my last school, and it was good. It was a number of years ago, maybe 10 years or more years, well, it'd be more than that now. But the document at that time was very onerous. It was very big. It was thick. It was one size fits all kind of model. And I think that's one thing that we were really keen to do on the Working Party, recognise that schools are in different positions. There's a lot of work around growing your own food, which is great, but some schools don't have that facility in their school. I was really, really keen to be part of the Working Party because, well, for things that we talked about the sustainability, about how influential our children are for their families and generational. It's not just about our children now, it's about going on in the future. I think the work, obviously, we use the word a lot, but the COVID situation, Naomi was fantastic during the COVID situation, as was Ben. We picked up the phone at any time, literally day or night, and she would get back to us immediately. So when it was Naomi's name on the document saying anybody want to be involved, I absolutely jumped at the chance, because I think she does a fabulous job in the local authority and for public health. And actually the framework, like Naomi said, it's gone out to professionals in their field, but then it's come back to us as school leaders, and actually what will work for us, what will work for our children, our setting. And the Working Party is made up of heads from different settings, and so what will work for one setting might not necessarily work for another setting. So we've had some really good conversations around that, and I think the fact that it is so multi-agency working has been really, really, really beneficial for this. And as I said, when the original Healthy Schools, gosh, maybe 15 years ago, I'm forgetting my years, was very onerous in terms of paperwork. This isn't, because we wanted to make it accessible for staff. School staff are very, very busy, as I'm sure you know, and we didn't want to make it another tick list job to do. It's more about culturally within the school, because it is so important to sort of build on. We've done a lot of work on mental health, certainly during the pandemic, and it's the next stage, isn't it? It's about physical health, about sustainability and all those things. So we wanted to make it accessible for everybody. And as I said, there were some really good conversations around making it work and not just a tick box exercise, actually looking at what we're doing really well, because I think as schools we're very quick to say, oh gosh, well, we're not doing this and we're not doing that, but actually this is a good platform to celebrate what we are doing well, and then looking at the next steps of how we can improve our outcomes for our children.
Yep, good, thank you for that. I'm sure there'll be other bits you can come back to us on once people start asking questions. I think it's probably appropriate. Ben, did you want to add anything, or the rest of your team, or do we now throw it open to the rest of the board members?
The only thing I wanted to add, Chair, was just to re-emphasise how important it is to have healthy and happy children, because they go on to achieve in school and they go on to have better life chances. So this isn't just about health. This is about the future life prospects of our children and young people, and that's why the culture thing is so important. And Lorraine's really eloquently explained that, I think. So I think, you know, the knock-on impact you hear at this scrutiny panel about exam results. This is the sort of thing that contributes to better exam results, better achievement at all levels, actually, from primary school upwards, for our children and young people. And there's good evidence to support that, and that's kind of underpinning what we're trying to do here, really. We're trying to give, as Naomi said, hope and aspiration to our children so they can go on to be whatever they want to be when they get older.
Yeah, absolutely. And I must say, I'm quite impressed. It sounds condescending when you say that, doesn't it? But I am impressed with the depth which this work has gone to, and the way it's approached the whole thing. I think the importance of the whole school approach is very important. I think that's an important aspect, and involving other holders who have responsibilities in this sort of area is a very important thing, of pulling together all those sorts of strengths. So what I'd like to do is to open things up to board members for any comments or questions they may have. Can't see any hands raised at the moment. I just saw one there.
Got Councillor Durrans and Councillor Issett, I think, please, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Durrans, would you like to go first then, please?
Thank you, Chair. I do have an interest to declare, but not a pecuniary interest, just a personal interest. I'm on the MHST steering group as a parent, which obviously does kind of address some of the points that might be raised, and I am a school governor. So the report was really good, so thank you for that. I've just got a couple of questions, if that's okay, around the grading, I guess. There's a couple of mentions in silver and bronze around PSHCE, and I used to work within primary education, and that was my responsibility to deliver. And then as it gets to gold, there's no specific mention, or not that I've noticed. And during the time that I worked delivering that, we always was told, and I think the head teacher, I think she's called Lauren, sorry if I've got that wrong, I'm rubbish with names, made reference to a culture. And one of the addresses that we would say is, if you're going to address PSHCE in one lesson a week and then kind of leave it there, there's lots of missed opportunities for relearning within your core subjects. And often schools that bought into the theme of the week around it would get a lot more out of it. And I know that schools are under a lot of pressure, but considering that we're talking specifically around health and wellbeing here, I thought it'd be worth kind of mentioning if that had been considered. And then the only other bit is, when we was looking at trauma response and working on, I guess, when issues have occurred with young people, I wasn't clear if there was any information on supporting young people understanding risk, on how they can access, you know, and have the right tools to address that before we get to the point where they may be coming to a situation that it's kind of grown. Particularly I'm thinking with eating conditions and things, it's kind of a safe space to look at what that might be. And I guess that brings it back to the PSHE, and depending on which area you're in within Calderdale, risks might be different for different students, so that would often have to be led by the schools. But I just wondered if that would be considered, and I haven't understood it very well. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to respond to those two?
Can I ask Lorraine to come in on the first one? Would that be all right, Lorraine?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, so PSHE is obviously a statutory part of the national curriculum, but I'm going to shoot myself in the foot now. Any good school will not just do it for half an hour a week. It will be threaded through the daily life, living and breathing, the ethos and the culture of the school. I know ours certainly does. Our culture is called Branch Out, and we have 5 branches of the whole culture and the ethos, and it's threaded through absolutely everything. So whilst I see what you're saying about the one-off kind of thing, and we do a one-off lesson per week on the statutory curriculum, but the whole culture and ethos of PSHE and sort of personal development comes throughout everything. And I think at primary schools we do that certainly really, really, really well. And in terms of where you're talking about the awards, so the expectation is if you're going for silver or above, you've already met all of the criteria of bronze.
I started to lose my mind with this computer.
So whatever's within the bronze award, the expectation is that you've got that before you move on to silver, and the same for gold. So if you're going for gold, you've got all the bronze and all of the silver expectations before you move on to bronze. Does that answer that?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I did expect that, but I just thought when it was kind of graded, it would be worth asking. So thank you.
It's always safe to ask, isn't it, rather than make assumptions.
Can I just add, Chair? Can I just add something to that as well? I think it's really important to emphasise. Lorraine's talked about what a good school looks like. It's always difficult to say what a good school looks like, isn't it? But in terms of PSHE, the schools that are doing it well view it as a spiral curriculum. So it's not just you have it in year 2 and you never hear about it again. It's repeated, and maybe with different nuances as children get older, and that's really important as well, I think. And just to emphasise, that these things don't just happen once in your time in school, but are built on as you go through the school years for many of the things we cover in PSHE.
Thank you for that. Was there a second question that needed answering, or have we covered that?
I think the second question was about how we take a more preventative approach to stop problems happening, whether this is captured within the framework adequately, and a bit, I think, also in some ways about trauma-informed practice as well, in some ways as well. Naomi, do you want to pick up on this one? We can't hear you, Naomi.
Is it the dreaded mute, or is it?
No, I think she's pretending to talk but not really speaking, so she's making me do it.
You're so silly, one so young, Ben.
So I think I'll chip in because we can't hear Naomi, I think, then in that case, and I won't do as good a job. And Naomi will put something in the chat if I've missed something really important. Yeah. So I think we've recognised, Naomi and I were talking about it earlier today, that there probably is a domain that we haven't captured adequately in the Healthy Schools programme about trauma-informed practice. And that's something that we wanted to take back to the steering groups. Now, we're not just going to add stuff in because it's up to the steering groups to help us shape that. But I do think it's something we perhaps need to take back for further discussion. And it may be that it becomes one of the strands that we have got going forward. The whole point about the Healthy Schools programme is that it is adaptable. So as a group of partners and as the steering group, if there are things that we think perhaps we might need that aren't in there, we can add things in over time, and just make it an even better product, really, I think. It's all about meeting needs. Lorraine wants to come in on that, so I'll pause for a second and bring Lorraine in.
Away you go, Lorraine.
Sorry. I was just sort of to echo again what Ben was saying, really. We're going to be, at our school, we're going to be sort of trialling it in the autumn term and looking at sort of evidence gathering to iron out any of these problems, because we're not going to be rolling it out to the rest of Calderdale until January. So this is the kind of time that we can add in extra bits before rolling out to a wider community. So that's certainly something we can take back to a working group and have a look at. And I know there's a lot of good work going on in Calderdale around mental health support workers. We've got one in our school every week, and so I know it would be quite a good one to add in and quite easy to evidence that the things that we're doing.
That's interesting to hear as well, the way you were talking there, Lorraine, about almost being the sort of guinea pig, as it were, having a guinea pig run of the thing before it happens in January. One of my questions was going to be about the rollout programme and so on. And I guess because of the good stuff in this, people are very keen to get it going. But I think what you're proposing here to do a guinea pig session would be very appropriate. And
it was something that we discussed in the working group. With anything new, there's always going to be sort of teething problems or barriers that will come up against, and rather than rolling it out wider and people coming back and saying, well, this doesn't work or we can't do that, we thought we'd be sort of, like you say, the guinea pigs to try it and report back any issues.
That sounds good to me. Thank you for that. I've got a list building up here in terms of questions. I've got Councillor Issett, I've got David Gott, I've got Councillor Foster, Councillor Tremaine. So I haven't missed you. I've got you at least those. First one on my list is Felicity. Councillor Issett, do you want to come in on your question?
Hi, yeah, I've got a couple of questions. It might need a little bit of sort of back and forth as such. The first one is around, you talked about there being a national programme, but there not being one anymore. But I was under the impression that there was a sort of national schools, healthy schools rating system released in 2019, of where people self-assess themselves against sort of and award themselves points and then get awarded bronze, silver and gold. Is that not the case? Because that's all over the government website. Just because I'm just wondering why because I appreciate that doesn't address as much, anywhere near as much detail as this, but some schools will probably have been accredited through that maybe, or does that not exist anymore either?
Can we have a response to that specifically, please?
Yeah, I think Naomi's got a hand up, which means she probably wants to answer that. So let's see if we can hear her this time.
Indeed.
No, we can't. Naomi, can you put a response in the chat? If you can put a response in the chat, and if we can come on to your other question, Councillor Issett, and then if Naomi hasn't adequately covered it off in the chat, then we can have a further conversation about it.
And then the next bit was sort of, and I know that in the PowerPoint, in the presentation that was attached as part of the stuff that was sent out, it talked about there being no formal definition of a health promoting school. But my concerns, or not concerns, but when I was reading the framework, so the statements for the framework, lots of it to me didn't scream healthy school. Lots of it to me sort of touched on the personal development aspect of the sort of Ofsted framework, looking at SMSC and British values and things like that, particularly the health and wellbeing promotion section that only seems to be in the silver. And just some of those statements, if I was being told that my child went to a healthy school, then I would, just 1 second, I'll take one meeting, darling. Okay, in a minute, sweetheart. Sorry, my little girl just popped in. I wouldn't necessarily associate that with a healthy school. You know, as a parent, for example, schools offering debt advice, that isn't necessarily a healthy school. And I appreciate it can help the family, but is it healthy schools? And then I think some of the other things as you go on to the silver bit, talking about staff being encouraged to do church sessions and litter picks, and I just worry that some of that as an extra burden on an already very, very stretched school and very, very stretched staff. And some of that doesn't necessarily mean healthy schools. I think the food stuff, the emotional wellbeing stuff, the exercise stuff, brilliant. Exactly what you would expect healthy schools to be. But some of that other stuff I think is sort of verging on inclusive schools. And I just feel like it might have some sort of, I think it might add an extra burden to staff and schools and therefore put them off engaging with the process, if that makes sense.
Perfect sense. You okay if I come back on that, Chair?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, so I'm going to say a little bit, and then Lorraine, I'm going to bring Lorraine in, who I think wants to come in anyway. So I think, first of all, it's really important to state that to have silver, you've done the bronze stuff, so you've done some of the health stuff as well. I think the other really important thing is to think about the factors that influence health. So we talk quite a lot in public health about what's called the wider determinants of health, which is a horribly titled name for the factors that might have an influence on health, which aren't necessarily about health. So not having enough money, for example, means that it makes it very difficult for you to make healthy choices. And we've had conversations here before at this panel about how you can make healthy food choices when actually you haven't got enough money to be able to do that. It's easier if you've got more money. We've talked before about the positive impact of relationships in its broadest sense, so that interaction with others and that community action type thing, and the being part of a community has on health and well-being. There are many factors, and I could talk to you all night about it. I'm quite happy to do a briefing for you afterwards and send it on to you if that would help, Councillor Issett, about the factors that influence health. And what we've tried to do is pick out some of those and build those in, recognising that actually if we do address some of those underpinning issues, it will have a positive impact on health and well-being. It is a longer conversation than we've got time for tonight, but if it would be helpful, I think we'd be happy to provide a kind of a written briefing on the wider determinants of health for members, if that would be appreciated. I don't know if that helps you, Councillor Issett, and I know that Lorraine wanted to come in, so she may have something to add to that as well.
I think that will be a useful response anyway, picking up on what Councillor Issett has said. Lorraine, I will hope you would come in on this because there was reference to the impact on schools and things.
Yeah, I think I understand your concerns, and I appreciate your concerns as working in a busy school. So thanks for thinking of our staff. I would say, again, similar to Ben, health isn't just about physical health, and it isn't just about the children we have right now. It's more about healthy lifestyles and healthy families and healthy relationships, and then the legacy that will have. Obviously the children are with us sort of 6.5 hours a day, so what we can do in that limited time to support the children, but obviously we don't just support children, we support families. The number of parents I have in my office regularly, talking about various community issues or family issues. So actually the debt management, whilst I'm a teacher, I'm not a debt specialist, but we signpost our families to various agencies and support. And I think it's more about having our children and therefore our families and communities for longer term, having healthy lifestyles for the future, and also the children themselves knowing how to manage money to some degree. I know our children only go up to 11, but we do talk about good choices. That's one of our branch outs, is about making good choices in life and in learning. So whilst it would be a different job for our staff to do, it's one that we've certainly spoken about at school level, about how we can engage with our families. And that's another nice element of the Healthy Schools, is to engage with our families as well. Pre-COVID, our families were really engaged, and since COVID it's a bit more of a battle to get them involved, that they are still a little bit more at arm's length. And actually this framework builds in family connection and interaction, so that can only be a really good thing, in my opinion.
Okay.
I don't disagree with some of the stuff that's in it, and I don't disagree with necessarily some of the stuff that we should do, and working in schools that serve areas of real socioeconomic disadvantage, I appreciate. And it's that line, isn't it, of where does the role of a school end, and where does it actually, because are we here to educate, are we here to, and I was just concerned that some of those statements people might read it and just put them off engaging with it, because it might be a little bit too that was my only thing. Because when you think about health from a Healthy Schools perspective, pointing out debt advice, whilst important and useful, and if the family's healthy, the child's healthy, it's like happy mum, happy baby, does that actually make it a healthy school? And therefore that was just, but yeah, I appreciate that it is really important, and schools are going to do it anyway, because we pick up the pieces from everything. We pick up a lot of the pieces, don't we? But yeah, thank you for your answers.
I think that's important, and I think my only concern in the area would be to make sure it doesn't detract from the other key elements of the process. And for what Lorraine's saying, certainly within her school, it's not a real problem there, and it's not a problem to the teachers. I think also that the provisos built into this are more aimed at the schools rather than parents, as it were. It's not particularly directed at parents, it's about schools because they're looking after the children in this sense. So I'd like to move on to David Gott, please, was the next on my list for his question.
Well, Lorraine and Ben have essentially answered most of my initial questions, but I may be straying on to the next item of the agenda, but I'd be keen to hear how the sensitivities where schools are working in areas where there's high reliance upon food banks, and particularly if the members of staff are reliant on food banks.
Now, that's an interesting one, isn't it?
I'm aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely, I'm sure you are.
Sadly.
I mean, is that something for Lorraine or Naomi or Ben? Anybody got any thoughts on that?
I'll come in initially, and I think, look, there's clearly a difference between what schools offer to children and young people in terms of the food and nutrition offer, and what happens outside of school and in communities. And I know many of our schools who are operating in those communities where perhaps we've got, people who are not quite so well off, do a lot of additional support actually in terms of breakfast clubs and engaging very much in that, in ensuring that we're providing meals over school holidays as well. So there is work that goes on, and this comes back to the importance of schools as anchor institutions in places, really, and they're on that. And I think schools take that pretty seriously, actually, in my experience. So in that context, I think schools do what they can to support families.
I'd like to say to thank those schools and yourselves for that. And the office.
I think the work that schools do is fantastic. I think the issue around whether actually school staff are needing to access food banks, I don't know about that, and that is an interesting point. And I think that's something we can take out from this meeting and have a chat with schools about, actually, because all the work we're doing as a council and as a system around the cost of living crisis, I think it's important that we consider factors like that and the impact that may have on a broader impact. So if we can take that particular point outside of this meeting and feed it into the broader discussions that are happening around cost of living crisis, which is happening on a much bigger scale. I think we've discussed it at Scrutiny panel here before, haven't we, about the need to approach that as a whole system rather than at an individual Scrutiny panel level. So I'm happy again to take that action away, to pick that up with the lead in the council around that. I don't know whether Lorraine's got anything to add, and also I don't know whether Councillor Courtney has anything to add as well as a cabinet member.
Lorraine, are you okay with things? Sarah, did you want to add anything there? Or I think Ben's probably covered that quite effectively.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we're looking as a council, aren't we, across the board to try and do whatever we can to help our residents and people around the cost of living crisis, and certainly, So I think, I think we will be looking to see what we can do. I mean, it is a really interesting question. We'll be discussing that.
It'd be interesting for Ben to take it away, like you said. That would be an interesting one. Thanks for raising it, David. So can I move on to Dot? Councillor Foster, you've had your hand up for a while. We're gradually working our way through the list.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of questions. Firstly, thank you for the report. It's really, really interesting, and the wealth of things that are considered under the criteria for particularly the awards of silver and gold is just quite extraordinary. It's quite a list to get through, and I think it will really show the elite schools for what they are when they've managed to achieve all of this, because it's quite a list. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points. First has been touched on about staff health and well-being being supported and celebrated. I think a staff information board isn't, although that's nice to celebrate what people do in their spare time, I think it also needs to ensure that all staff have access to resources that support their health and well-being, and particularly the mental health. Teaching is, or can be, an incredibly stressful job. How on earth you do it, I don't know, because the hours you all put in are quite extraordinary. I mean, it's almost sort of the tales one hears as a non-teacher. You wonder if teachers actually have any spare time at all, to be perfectly frank. So my hat's off to all of you, really. But I think that needs just expanding a little bit to include sort of making sure that all staff have access to the support for mental health and well-being. Just to ensure that that's included, and it's just not just a notice board of pretty pictures and I don't know, pots of jam and knitting, or whatever. So that's the first one. And the second one is, will there be any training available for staff that are taking a role in this, and also for governors, particularly when you get to the gold criteria? There is a specific action for a named governor to be involved, and I would like to hope that would include some training so that the named governor actually knows what they're supposed to be looking out for and how to best support the school that they're working with. That's me, thank you.
Yeah, I particularly like your last comment there in relation to the governors. One of my notes is, as a chair of governors at a primary school, we need to be aware of this, and we as governors need to be part of that process as well. So who would like to respond to Dot's questions, comments?
We'll try Naomi and see if we can hear her again.
Right.
Go on, Naomi.
Go on, have a go.
No.
Sorry, Naomi.
Lorraine, I'm putting you on the spot here a bit. Do you want to come in on this bit initially, and then I'll add some bits in as we go along?
Yeah, of course, that's fine. I know a lot of schools have been doing a lot around mental health and wellbeing. I know we certainly have. We were awarded the Carnegie Mental Health Award last year, and as part of that, we have sort of a mental health champion. So we do have a lovely display board in school, but we also have the mental health champion who does go around, sends emails regularly. There was one that she sent yesterday from the Anna Freud Society about staff wellbeing during the summer holidays. Calderdale Council also did a really, really good programme. I'm not sure if it's still ongoing, but they offered free treatments, free workshops, free dance lessons for Calderdale staff, which lots of our staff took up. So there was a lot out there, actually. And I know the mental health working group that my mental health champion sits on, they put out things really regularly all the time. And I think that's something that Calderdale does really well with, actually, with the supporting colleagues' mental health. So that's a real positive. And then in terms of training, I don't think we've talked about it really, Naomi. I think one of the things that when we've been talking about sort of us rolling it out, and I know Alice at Todd was going to roll it out as well, was sort of finding those pitfalls and things like that. And I think that would be really good natural development for our working group to do training. I mean, I kind of anticipate it going to CPHA, which is Calderdale Primary Heads. I anticipate that we'll probably do something there for the head teachers, but it could certainly then sort of develop onto staff training for sort of the lead on it. We have said that we think it's really important that a senior leader takes lead on the healthy schools to give it that profile within school. So I think that could be quite a natural next step for the working group. But I might be talking out of turn, and Naomi might come in and go, no, we don't want to do that at all.
She can't talk at the moment, I'm afraid. Thank you for that, Lorraine. Ben, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, well, if that's okay. I think, first of all, it's really important that we shape the level of support that's required by schools from the feedback from the schools. So what Lorraine is talking about is great. And, if schools are saying we want X, we want Y, we want Z, we will do our best to support them. That's what we've done. That's the co-production thing, isn't it? This is working in partnership. And the other really important bit for me is that when we said this at the beginning, we're really keen that we don't have a one size fits all. And we know with something like this that there will be some schools who just pick it up and run with it. We know that there will be other schools that need a bit more support, and we've got a bit more support from the public health team and from the professionals we work with who can do that. You know, so there's some stuff we can do on a group basis. So Becky, who's on the call but has got a sniffly nose and I don't think wants to do too much talking, but is listening hard, is our public health in schools coordinator, and she will do some work with the wellbeing leads from each of the schools, because she runs some of those networks with those school wellbeing leads, for example. Equally, if there are any schools that are really struggling and do want some intensive support, again, we'll be able to do that in that initial period to get them off the ground. One of the things that's really important that we've built in is that, and we're looking to develop, is a sustainable model where the schools that are really flying with it can support other schools going forward. So, you know, we're a small public health team, as you know, but public health is much bigger than the public health team, and we've talked already about the important role of schools as settings in the health and wellbeing of children and young people. A number of schools, you know, actually have said that they're keen to, as they progress and as they can show that they can do this really well, want to help others in their area also achieve and recognise the importance of developing that network, sharing good practice, role modelling. There is a proper term, being an ambassador, that's the right term, isn't it, Lorraine? Yeah, being an ambassador for this. And that's really important too. And that brings in some of the sustainability of this, but it means it's really owned by the schools as well. And that's a really important concept for us with this whole programme, was that schools felt like it was something they owned rather than something that was being imposed.
Very much so, yeah. Just for other board members' awareness, Naomi's managed to get something on the chat box as part of the answer to this question, if you want to check it out there. Can I move on to our next questioner? My colleague and Deputy Chair, Councillor Tremaine. Diana, I think you've had your hand up for about 3 weeks now, so
that's fine. And actually, it's coincidentally, Ben has basically just answered the first question which I was going to ask, which was about the kind of rolling it out effectively right across the board, because that's the challenge, isn't it? And you've got your early adopters, but then, and I think the ambassador idea is brilliant, but it sounds as if you've put a lot in place there to make sure it does reach each school, which is fantastic. And I guess that's just important to keep an eye on that, isn't it, as it happens, to make sure that is happening. So I'll go on to my other question, which was a bit of a nitty-gritty question on page 36. It was about the focus on physical activity bit of the criteria. And it spoke about a minimum of 2 active lessons and an active homework each week in all lessons, all classes. And I just wanted to kind of make a bit more sense of that, because I was thinking, is that aimed at primary? Is it secondary? How does that work, and what does it mean? I don't know who's going to answer that one.
Is that a teacher one, or is it an officer one?
Yeah, I can go with that if you want me to.
Yeah,
so as well as healthy schools, I'm sure councillors are aware of the active schools Calderdale. So we're part of the Trailblazer with that, and that's not just a PE thing. We're supposed to have 2 hours of physical activity anyway as part of our PE curriculum. That's a standard. But with the the active schools, that's about having activity in every lesson, rather than sitting sedentary at a desk for an hour. It's being up and active and moving. So that was built in really to go hand in hand with that, because Rebecca Ancliffe has been part of the working party as well, who heads up the active schools, which a lot of it overlaps, obviously. And so it was designed really, again, to get the parental and the community engagement. And that's not saying on a weekend you've got to go and climb a mountain. That's saying, rather than going in the car down to the co-op, go and walk down to the co-op, or go for a walk in your local area and draw a flower that you like. And that can be very, very much from reception nursery level. And we did a lot of that in a lot of our home learning was tailored around your daily exercise, and whilst you're out there, go and see if you can spot 3 different coloured flowers, or further up the school, can you draw a piece of wildlife and things like that. So it's about encouraging the children to be more physically active in their everyday life. So it's not just about going and on a massive bike ride, because that could be excluding some children perhaps who don't have a bike or don't have a garden, but it's about running up and down stairs 3 times and rather than just going the once, so it was more about tying those 2 programs in together, because obviously there was a really big overlap. And then just on your first part as well about the sustainability, Ben did talk about the ambassadors, and that was something that we thought would really sort of embed healthy schools across the borough, because every school obviously has got different priorities and are in different positions, and so we thought that it's the sharing good practice and the collaboration again, and having sort of peer-to-peer support rather than having obviously public health is a small team, but we said to put the sort of the emphasis and the credibility behind the award to roll it out wider and have more support with sort of peer-to-peer support as well.
Well, that's brilliant. Yeah, the query about the active stuff, it was almost more as much about, when it talks about classes, is it talking about year groups or is it talking about subjects? Because that's what I was thinking. Is it primary focused or?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's in subject. So just to put it into context, we've got cross-curricular orienteering. So our year 2s yesterday were out doing maths around the premises. So they have to go to each different part of the orienteering course and solve a maths puzzle. So rather than sitting at a desk doing the maths puzzle, they're out in the grounds, they're getting fresh air, they're getting exercise, and it will hopefully, the idea is that it sticks a little bit more with them. So it's right from, well, we do it right from reception upwards.
That's great, thanks.
Excellent, thank you for that. Is that okay, Diana?
Ashley, can I just add something into that as well? Sorry, yeah. Ashley, is that just specifically about specifically about this topic? So I went to visit one of the active schools, and I absolutely would recommend going to visit a school like. It was absolutely stunning. So I went to Salisbury New Road School, and right from there. EYFS, right from the really little ones up to year 6, they were doing active lessons. It's not about PE. It's about, if you're doing an art lesson, you might be out in the playground making sculpture shapes. If you're doing a phonics lesson, you're throwing bean bags into hoops. You're not just, and it works really well for children. A lot of children with additional needs. If they're fidgeting and they're standing outside, they're not going to get. That's all can be accommodated. Sort of. I mean, it was phenomenal to go and see, and it's not just in primary. So there are active schools have signed up, secondary schools have signed up as well, and it's a really, really good way of introducing activity into day-to-day, just normal day-to-day life. And one of the things that's really important in public health, in terms of healthy populations, is not just about people going to sports centres to do sports or doing sports. It's about having more activity in their daily lives. So it's about not so like having, standing, walking around, doing more active things, not using your car for short journeys, those sorts of things. And I think that the active schools program, the active lessons thing is really about embedding a little bit more activity into people's daily life. If you can get used to doing it in school when you're a child, then actually maybe you'll use a standing desk when you're at work. Those sorts of little things like that is just sort of little things. And that's really important on a public health level. That's the sort of thing that actually will make a difference to people's lives in the long term.
Thank you for that, Sarah. Yes, I've still got Councillor River on Councillor Monteith. I will get to you, but Ben is waving at me, I think, as well, wants to come in on this question as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just really want to emphasise the importance of seeing healthy schools as an umbrella for lots of different things, active physical activity being one of them. And what we really wanted to pull away from, and our schools have told us this before, is they don't want someone coming to talking about active and there's somebody else coming to talk about mental health and somebody else coming to talk about food. It's trying to bring everything together so it's one conversation about a range of public health issues. And the active part of this is really good, and it is probably more developed than some of the other bits and has been tested. As we go forward, though, Lorraine and Alice Todd will be testing other bits, and we will bring more and more on board. And what we want to see is the things that we're seeing in terms of active schools as part of a much bigger whole of the whole school culture around healthy schools. So trying to move away from those individual programs of work and trying to bring it into one whole, I think, makes it much easier for schools to manage that. We've been very conscious about that. Schools have told us for a long time, stop talking to us about individual issues, come and talk to us about the whole. And that's what we've tried to do with this. And that's why, it's an underpinning ethos of the whole thing.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. Thank you for that. Finally, Councillor Riveron, Helen, would you like to pose your question? I've got more hands up now. All these people want to say things. Helen,
right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. A couple of things. Thank you, Chair. One thing that I would like to come back to the thing about mental health, emotional health. I know it has been mentioned, but I think it is worth saying that a healthy school, as well as one where people can active lifestyles and healthy food, is one where children and adults will have good emotional health, good mental health, be avoiding risky behaviours like self-harming, will be forming positive relationships. And I think that it is easy for that to get lost. So I just think it does still need emphasising how important good mental health is. And I think also in the context that we're recovering from COVID, much anecdotal evidence certainly about the impact on mental health, and also again a number of people are finding it difficult to access mental health services. So I think for all those reasons we do need to make sure that is really written large within a healthy school has got to be one where there's good mental health and good emotional health. Other thing I wanted to mention around the training, which I would totally support, and having myself attended trauma-informed training, is there can sometimes be a mismatch between what we're told in the training and what we feel forced to do in our everyday roles as teachers, because some of the things that, schools can be a high-pressure environment, more so for some children, young people, than for others. And, I could find that I was listening to things on training which were I knew made sense in children's I teach young people and adults in terms of their healthy lifestyles, but I still had all this pressure around attendance, around targets, around achievements. And, I could be listening to training and says, but actually I won't be able to do that because I'm under all these other pressures. So I think perhaps I don't have a solution, but maybe doing an honest conversation about some of the things we might want to do in emotionally healthy school are going to be difficult to do because of all the other pressures that we're all facing. And the final point I wanted to pick up again on a point that I think Councillor Durran's made quite a while ago now, and I think that was around risk and children and young people managing risk. Don't want to speak for Councillor Durran's, but I did wonder if there's anything perhaps around perhaps avoiding risky behaviours, but also about how we encourage young people to manage risk, because risk is a part of life we cannot avoid. Thank you.
Thank you. Some interesting and useful observations there. Does anybody want to come back on any of those points?
Yeah, I'll start if that's okay, Chair, and others can chip in if they wish. So let's start with the risk. I think what I would say is risky behaviours and risk-taking behaviours is covered off by the PSHE curriculum, and that's part of that curriculum. And healthy schools is not the only thing that we're doing with schools, and it's not the only public health action schools are taking. So there is support, there's targeted support where we know that things are going on in schools that may be around risky behaviours, whether that's around substance misuse, for example, alcohol or drugs or cigarettes or anything like that, and or whether it's some of the support we give around sexual health and education and relationships and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of stuff is all happening as well as on top of this, and we've got specialist services who work closely with schools to do some of that as well. it's not to say that we've got it perfect. And one of the other strands of work that we'll be doing throughout this year is ensuring that that is as of good a quality as it can be, because it's a really important adjunct to this piece of work. And some of that is providing schools with high quality resources they can use. And we do in Calderdale pay for every school to have access to the PSHE Association resources, which is really helpful, I think, for pulling off lesson plans and what have you, to support PSHE delivery. But I think the other part that we want to do is ensure that when we do get or we do identify particular needs within individual schools, that we respond to that in an appropriate way and provide that extra support, that extra targeted support to meet those particular needs. So it's probably a conversation for another day, but I think it's that reassurance that we are doing that as well as doing this. It's not an either or, it's a both and. The statement around emotional health and wellbeing, I couldn't agree more with you, Councillor River, absolutely really important. Naomi, if she could speak, would tell you how that's been what's in the Healthy Schools programme on that has been co-produced by experts across the system and schools to ensure that we've got that as strong as we can within the within the Healthy Schools programme. Again, that there's more going on as well, and Lorraine has already talked about, for example, the specialist mental health support team worker that is available, and many schools have got that sort of extra support as well. I couldn't agree more with you there. It's really important, and the happy bit is as important as the healthy bit, and that's again central to the programme. There was a couple of other questions that I can't remember offhand, so what is there anything else particularly you wanted me to cover off, Councillor River?
Well, maybe it's more an education question, but it is around some of the tension sometimes maybe around the pressures that are part of school life, and perhaps the things that we will want to do in terms of things around the trauma-informed training, that perhaps sometimes the very pressures around achievement targets and exams and so on means that we perhaps can actually contribute to the unhealthy atmosphere.
Yeah, so I think there's part of what we need to do as part of the rollout of the Healthy Schools programme is make sure that we evaluate the impact of that and how easy it is for schools to apply in reality to their setting. We talked about culture and whole setting, and getting that feedback from heads is going to be really important. And the initial test scores, Lorraine and Alice, are going to be really important in terms of helping us inform that. But it will be an ongoing process. I think just in terms of the ongoing challenges schools have, it's a really difficult job. It's a job I know I couldn't do. It's very high pressure, and it is really difficult to actually do. It's not always the easiest thing to do the right thing when you're under a lot of pressure, as you say. Lorraine, have you got anything you wanted to add on that? Because you'll have first-hand experience of this, won't you?
Yeah, I absolutely agree that there are an awful lot of pressures, and it's very easy to go on a course or training of some description and then come back and think how I'm going to do, and then lots of things get in the way. We're absolutely conscious of that. However, for children who have experienced trauma or have got some sort of emotional barrier going on, they can't achieve until we've unpicked that. They can't succeed. Happy children learn well. Children who are traumatized or have got emotional barriers don't. And so unless we do unpick those and deal with those issues, and like Ben said, there are a lot of services within the authority that we can tap into for various different things on a level before we need to go to a CAMS kind of situation. But unless we address those things, children just won't learn. So their academic targets and things won't be achieved whether you do or you don't. We do need to make sure we have happy children coming in through our doors on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think I respect Helen's desire to make us aware of the pressure which is on teachers, and I doubly respect the teachers for dealing with it. But it's comforting that Lorraine's response there. I think
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I need to move on to let Brenda, Councillor Monteith, ask her question. She's been even more impatient. No, not impatient, even more patient than everybody else. So please put your question. I think you're on mute as far as I'm concerned anyway. That looks better to me.
Oh, right. It's a comment more than a question, in that I think this is a very well thought out and graduated response to the healthy schools issue. And I think that we need now to kind of see what happens in the rollout, and see how it needs to be tweaked perhaps around the edges, but taking up some of the things that have been mentioned this evening. And this scrutiny board, I think, needs to recommend it very strongly to the council. And I just wanted to ask, will there be any resource attached to it?
I guess, Ben, that's the last question. Will come to you.
The resource in terms of the support that you'll get, our schools will get from the public health team to get up and running. Resource in the context of, you know, schools do like something to stick on the wall, whether that's a certificate or a plaque or whatever, so that will be provided as part of the scheme. And resource in terms of recognition from senior leaders within the council at school of the role schools are undertaking. If you're asking whether there's going to be any financial allocations to schools, that's not what we've got in mind, because what we're trying to do here is take what the functions at schools actually probably should be doing anyway as part of their PSHE and their culture of you know, providing the best education and best support to the children and young people they've got, build on that and support them in terms of developing the framework, rather than saying here's some money to make things better. That's not to say there's not resource available from other sources to help support with certain aspects of it. And there's been quite a lot of investment, for example, in emotional health and wellbeing, and there are more staff resources in schools to help with that. And there has been resource gone into developing the skills of staff who work in education to support children and young people with that. And don't forget also that we've got the existing resource that we put in from the range of our other services, and the school nursing service, and particularly the Open Minds partnership as well, that provide a lot of that physical and emotional health and wellbeing support on top of, you know, what we're doing here. So does that give you a kind of overview of the level of support, which isn't necessarily about financial allocation, but is around a whole package of support around the school, if that makes sense?
I think the support is very important. Councillor Matisse, did you want to come back on that?
No, I was thinking more about council resource rather than public health resource.
Are the two overlapping? Probably. I would say so. Public health is council. Council is Calderdale. I think this is a whole system thing. So I think this is more. We'd view this more as a team Calderdale thing than a council thing or a school thing or whatever. We're all contributing in different ways to bring this to fruition. Really, I think I would certainly recognise how much effort the schools have put in to help us develop it, and how much effort they'll put into delivering it. And hopefully schools would recognise how much effort we're putting in to support it as well. Naomi's talked about this isn't just public health. We've worked very closely with colleagues elsewhere in the council. And so people who work in, I think Paul is on the call somewhere. He's taken himself off the picture, but working with people in Paul's team as well to ensure that this is a whole council approach. And Naomi said at the beginning, public health may be front and centre in terms of leading the work in terms of putting it together, but the work itself is very much a partnership involving various bits of the council, various bits of the NHS and health and wellbeing providers, and in particular the education system as well. So that would be my view on it, really. I think it is a Calderdale thing rather than a council thing. Yeah, I mean, I would kind of agree. I mean, finance, that we could always use more money, couldn't we, on these things? But I think the important thing is the people working together and supporting and helping each other. It's going to make it more effective. I'm afraid we're going to have to live with that. We're also going to have to live with the fact that we've given this a good length of time. I noticed that Councillor Foster, would you like to come back with a quick question, please? Because we have another item on the agenda.
Yes, it's only a very, very quick one. Just referring to the active clubs offered a minimum 3 times a week. Can we have assurances that those would be non-charged clubs? I mean, it mentions break and lunchtime, but there is a tendency for after-school clubs to have a charge associated with them in some cases, and I think that would discriminate against those parents who cannot afford to pay that. So it's just a quick question as sort of what is the intention with that? Thank you.
Lorraine, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I'm just speaking purely from my school. I can't speak for anybody else, but we don't charge for any after-school club other than the wraparound care that we offer. All the clubs that we offer are either goodwill from teaching staff, or we use some of the sport premium to pay sports coaches to provide it for everybody and anybody. So we don't charge for anything. But as I say, I can't speak for others.
I think, can I just add to that? I think we'll take that back. Naomi and I will have a think about that in terms of taking something to the working groups to see whether we need to be really clear on that. It's really important from an inequalities perspective, isn't it? So if we could take that back to the working groups, Naomi, just for a quick discussion and see whether we need to be more explicit, that would be helpful, I think.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah, that would be useful. Members, I think we need to pull this item to a close, I'm afraid. It's been a very good one, a very interesting one looked at in great depth based on an excellent piece of reporting by the officers and other members of the group working on it. I think it's been exceptionally good there. We as members of this board have been asked to consider the framework and approve it. My feeling is, and shout at me if I'm incorrect, my feeling is that there is a very high approval rating for this report. We've made some suggestions which are going to be fed back, which is important. And I think what we need to do is to pass this to Cabinet to take it on board. And we need, through, I hope, our Cabinet member here, to put pressure on Cabinet to take it on board and give it the nod and rubber stamp. And with all due respect, get on with it. Certainly the guinea piggy bit, and then moving on to it as soon as possible in January. And all I then would ask is that I think towards the end of this municipal year, it would be very interesting to have a little bit of a feedback on all of this and to see how it's going and what you've learned along the way. Is that a reasonable summary for everybody? Good. Thank you very much. And thank you, Lorraine, in particular, for joining us and standing in the firing line there. And Ben and your colleagues working on this one as well. And thanks for your input as well, Sarah, Councillor Courtney, on that one. Thank you for that. Can I move swiftly on to item 6, which is scrutiny detailed review of the school food. This is one which I've inherited from the previous incarnation of this board, and it's a report which looks into the detailed review on school food undertaken 21-22, and we may wish to recommend this report also to Cabinet, so let's have a look at it and think about it. We've got 2 people, I think, who are likely to present on this one. Councillor Tremaine, Diana, you were going to do it along with someone else, I think.
Yeah, Councillor Foster's going to dip in, I think, as and when, if I forget something.
Yeah, do you want to kick off, Diana, then?
That's fine. And I think, the key thing here is actually, I don't think it matters at all. It's really good that the previous item has been explored in a lot of depth because there's a very clear overlap between the two here, and it's kind of quite timely, I guess. Obviously, not entirely uncoincidental to have them on the same.
In relation to the timetable and so on.
Sorry.
Good planning on our part and Lauren's part.
Exactly. And it does make sense to put them together because obviously a lot of the school food review has been conducted with lots of discussion with Ben, with Naomi, Becky, the public health team, and the wider kind of council team. I'm not going to say loads, but I'll just outline a few bits and then we can go on to questions, discussion around it. What you will have seen from reading the report, but I think just, as we went through it, the scope of this, what started being, we thought, oh, school meals, yeah, we'll look at school meals, but the scope of this is huge, and you'll see that there are areas that we haven't been able to address in as much depth as we would have liked. It would have taken probably a year of weekly meetings to get further on this in some respects. But the overlap in terms of what we have talked about and the item we've just discussed, I think is really clear. We looked at this very much as an appreciative inquiry, so looking at what's happening across the council, outside the council, bringing in schools. We spoke to head teachers, other school representatives, and outside in terms of learning from other places, which may be different, but we wanted to kind of get that perspective on what the other options were, what the possibilities were, and things that we could learn from all those places. So looking at good practice outside, but also across the council, across the schools, across Calderdale and beyond, really. And just as I think Ben and Naomi spoke about a lot previously, the whole focus, or a lot of the focus, has been around the importance of communicating, collaborating, and of co-producing whatever comes out of this kind of project, or the sort of recommendations. It's not something that you can do to people, and not only is the council not in a position to say, you know, we're not going to suddenly take over school meals for all schools across the borough. That's not a practical solution, certainly not at this stage, even if people would like it to be. But to actually think about, you know, how schools support each other, how the council supports schools, what the different roles are there. So in terms of the recommendations, again, go into more depth on any questions there, but you'll see that there's one around public health, which actually I think very much echoes what we've just been talking about in terms of offering, you know, producing a kind of core offer around health, nutrition, wellbeing. I think we've really just been discussing that more or less to a great extent, linking in very well with that. The collaboration focus, we did a number of school visits as part of this, as well as the actual scrutiny sessions that we had. And, you know, we could see collaboration happening across different sites. People spoke really highly about the collaboration that developed over the pandemic period in particular. And I think, again, echoing some of the previous comments, that's actually makes it more likely that work in this area is going to succeed now, because actually those relationships are really strong and have been built really well over the last couple of years. And that's, you know, a huge amount of thanks to council staff and to all those working in education settings. In terms of outcomes, we also discussed the electronic health needs assessment. And again, that was discussed in the previous item too. So thinking about extending that, looking at further data that would help to sort of look in more depth around the whole idea of healthy schools. And one of the last items, which we think there's a huge amount of scope for, is around the opportunities for kind of community engagement and intergenerational opportunities. And I think that's an area where a lot of that was sort of put on hold really during the pandemic, and we were quite aware of that. There'd been a lot of good practice previously, much of which had to stop. And I think perhaps that's a key area where, as we look at the cost of living crisis as well, that's perhaps something that has real scope to be developed in terms of, you know, bringing benefits right across the borough and right across different parts of the borough. But we were very aware during this process around the challenges that schools face. And that was one of the key kind of points. We certainly didn't expect every school to be in the same position, but certainly from school visits and from what we saw and what was fed back, there were challenges that we perhaps may not have expected. And so I think the whole idea of co-production of support is key here. It's got to be something where people are working together on this and feeding back and feeling able to access the support that they need to actually kind of think about how they might perhaps change certain things, or just look at what's realistic and how they can sort of think about what to implement, but give them as much support as possible to do that, and learning from each other and learning from good practice. So, Councillor Foster, did you want to come in on with anything else on that?
Yeah, I think you've covered it all very, very thoroughly. So thank you, Diana. Yeah, I think it was an extremely interesting review to be part of, and I'm very pleased to have sort of played my small part in it. Excuse me. I think one of the most interesting parts of that was actually the visits we played to schools to see what it's like on the ground, and there's a very clear difference in the provision in some schools compared to others, and you know, you've got some schools that are really, really excellent, and some schools that could do a lot more to provide a wider range of foods for kids at lunchtime. But generally speaking, the provision that we saw was pretty good. You know, there's always room for improvement, but I think one of the big concerns that was raised, certainly one of the schools I visited, was from the head chef there, who said, well, we're doing what we can, but prices are going to have to go up because the cost of everything is going up. The cost of the raw ingredients, the cost of fuel to cook them, the cost of staff wages, absolutely everything is going up. And there is absolutely no way that we can continue with this provision and not put the prices up, which is, of course, going to impact families, particularly those who are not entitled to free meals, but only because they're just slightly over the criteria for free school meals. They're still on a very, very low income, but they're just not quite entitled to free school meals. And it's that group of people in particular that really concern me. And the worry is then that instead of getting the decent meal that they should have at lunchtime, they will have sort of a as inexpensively as possible made packed lunch, which might or might not be terribly nutritious, and then go home to not particularly great nutrition at home as well, because of the lack of finances to actually provide that. So it is a concern, and that's one thing that, you know, I think, I don't know what on earth we can do about it, because school budgets are being squeezed left, right and centre, but you know, it is a real issue, and I think it's one that we need to be aware of. But yeah, it was a really, really interesting project to be part of, and yeah, thank you to everybody who helped in any way, and particularly to Lauren, who did an awful lot of writing up.
Yeah, huge thank you to Lauren. Actually, one thing, partly in response to David's point earlier around food banks and things, which we didn't look in depth here, but one of the places that I visited with Sarah, with Councillor Courtney, was Halifax Academy, which was really, really inspiring example of good practice, where there was real community engagement there. And they were very fortunate. Obviously, it's kind of dual site, it's primary and secondary there, which is quite interesting. So there's kind of more of a crossover perhaps than in a lot of schools. But they also have a community kitchen there, and they have volunteers there, most of whom are parents. So they're actually getting skills and getting trained up as well in there, and going to get some qualifications there. But in the community kitchen, they provide meals which staff were able to sort of make it was a donation. It was a sort of, you know, pay what you feel type thing. So they could actually once a week say that they'd like, you know, whatever meal was being cooked, and pay what they could afford or what they felt was appropriate. And then other meals were offered to parents at sort of pick-up time. And they said that initially with that, there had been people who were perhaps reluctant to take this. You know, they didn't want to be seen as accepting charity, for example. But actually that had really built up, and it was just a really positive community feel as well. So it was really building the community engagement. So that's perhaps quite an interesting model, which isn't always possible to replicate, obviously, but that's quite an interesting one to look at.
Thank you. Got a couple of hands up here. Councillor Durran, Danielle, you wanted to ask a question, I think, didn't you? Would you like to come in there?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I am actually aware of the one at Halifax Academy because somebody had told me about what they was doing. And I know Councillor Tremaine raised a point about the accepting charity and the stigma. There is quite a lot around stigma around food and what you do need to support. And I just wondered if that had come across within other schools that you'd kind of worked with, or if because of their unusual offer that it had kind of highlighted it more than it possibly would have been. I know David had said about linked with the food banks and parents kind of being supported and being picked up in an appropriate way, but I guess from certain areas, my other concern and question is around what Dot had said, the opportunities for expanding different foods at home and then necessarily reintroducing them in schools and how often that has to be. But I just wondered if there would be consideration for what Halifax Academy has done to marry up with another school to kind of get them on the way in a different area where it might not be as full and ready to go with those skills. I'm just thinking of my area really, where there might be some of that area not as addressed, and how to take away the fear of it becoming a community thing. My church does a community meal once a month rather than it, it's never assumed as charity. Everybody just goes and eats together, which is taking that stigma away, which is hard to do, isn't it? I don't know if I've rambled on a bit there. Sorry, Chair. I'm kind of in
a stream of consciousness, Councillor.
Not at all. And Sarah might want to come in a minute on this, but I think what did work well with Halifax Academy was that it didn't come across like that. It came across, it had grown more and more as a community venture, basically. So it was beyond the school, and it wasn't kind of saying, oh, here you go. And the fact that, there were parents involved, it went right across the school and beyond it, and reaching out in a very sort of holistic way, rather than, oh, look, here's some food if anybody is needs it. It wasn't like that. And they said some really interesting examples, like there was someone who would pick up a meal, I think had a child at school, would pick up a meal when they did it and take it for someone else who worked in the NHS and worked shifts, and they'd drop this meal off for them, so that they had a hot meal or a homemade meal ready when they got back. So it had obviously broken down these different sort of barriers. And Halifax Academy was certainly really receptive to going out and sharing good practice. And I think that links, as I keep saying, really well with what Ben and Naomi have spoken about on the previous item, the sort of ambassadors idea and the kind of support. And one of the things which we did discuss was the idea of having, for example, a network of school cooks. So we often talk about good practice in terms of teaching staff, in terms of developing our teachers, but actually we were looking beyond that at kind of the whole school approach, really. So how do you engage everyone at the different levels to get more involved? So if there are different networks that people can access, then I think it might just spread those ideas a little bit more effectively, and that would be really good if we could have support across those areas.
Thank you for that. I've got Councillor Courtney, then Will, our youth council member. Ben, you've just put your hand up. Is it a general question, or are you responding to a particular one there? No. Okay, I'll come on to you then, Ben. Thank you. So, Councillor Courtney, Sarah, you wanted to...
Yeah, thank you. So I was just going to comment really on that topic. So at Halifax Academy, I think they started off doing it. They started off sort of cooking for some families sort of during the pandemic, and there was sort of like a real sort of feeling of need, and it just expanded completely. So the day that we visited there, they were cooking 250 meals, I think is what they said they were getting out of it. 250, portions of what smelt like an amazing dinner, and they said that the costs for that meal, now I don't know if that included like the energy costs in the kitchen, but certainly the food costs were 50 quid. It it was £50 for all of that, because they'd had lots of stuff donated. They had partner, so it's not just partners with parents and in the community, it's sort of partners amongst local shops and sort of supermarkets and food suppliers and stuff. So they had partners who would sort of give. I think they had a load of potatoes that were, they were completely fine and edible, but I think the shop had decided that they were possibly, they had a new load delivered, and these were sort of surplus. So they were getting a lot of donations of stuff, and because they were created, there were so many meals. It was like for everyone could have one, so there was no stigma, because everyone could have one. It wasn't just, oh, you can only have one if you haven't got enough money or whatever, so it was really fantastic, and they very, very, very keen to share their good practice. I think they do have the advantage of being a big school. They appreciated that. They appreciated the fact that they could someone who was their cover supervisor could more or less be moved sort of full time into that role of coordinating. But the people who were working in the kitchen on the day we visited, the parents, the volunteers, I think they had all completed their, or were working towards their level 3 in hygiene, and I don't know what the exact title of the qualification is, and actually looking at the possibility because of them being able to do outside catering events for the school and actually getting paid. So it's actually also a journey of them getting qualifications and potentially into paid work. I mean, a fantastic example of real community working. It was really inspiring.
Thank you for that, Sarah. I've now got Will. Welcome, Will. Will is our youth council member. Good to see you again. You have a question for us, I think.
Thanks. It's sort of a question, sort of comment. I will say the Halifax Academy sounds amazing, and the work that they've managed to do. I think it's also worth bearing in mind that youth clubs, so out of school systems, used to do a lot of good work when it came to food, and especially sort of, dinners and stuff. And I know that Leeds does a lot of good stuff with sort of sustainable food and stuff. They retrofitted an old bus once to turn it into a food bank, and they did that with the young people, and that was the sort of their big project for a year, and it worked really well. And obviously Calderdale cut the vast, I think basically all youth clubs right at the start of lockdown. So I think it's worth bearing in mind the impact they had on healthy eating as well. And I realised this report looked at school meals and stuff, and it is an amazing report and has a lot of good stuff in it. But I think it's worth bearing in mind the stuff around youth clubs and out of school feeding as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that observation.
Can I just come in really briefly there? I think that's a really good point to raise, Will, actually. And we didn't look at it, like I say, because the remit was kind of the school focus. But I think, I think what's within this report and what's within the previous item, it does show how important it is to go beyond the school. So I think that's an area that we can certainly look at. And in terms, for example, of around the intergenerational stuff, I think that didn't cover youth provision in specifically, but we did feel that there was a huge amount of scope in terms of different kind of community ways of engaging around this. So, and obviously, there are cuts which have been made. That's kind of beyond the discussion for now, but we did feel that some of the intergenerational work was a really good way to address some of the loss in other provision possibly, and that there's a lot to be built on there. So that doesn't really kind of answer that specific point in detail, but I think there's certainly a lot that can be looked at there. And certainly looking at sustainability, that was one of the kind of key areas that we thought could come through with that intergenerational work.
And I think it is important that we look at that aspect of it as well, isn't it, which Will has brought up. So thank you for that, Will. Ben, you're next on my list, I think. Yes.
I think Becky may have been slightly before me, actually.
Oh, my apologies, Becky. You are on my list, but I got you in a different order. Are you going to be a gentleman then, Ben, and pass it to Becky?
This first time for everything. I hope you can hear me because I've not tested out my microphone yet. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to add on a bit about the stuff about Halifax Academy. Firstly, just a bit of background that they do actually use Rethink in Pudsey to get their surplus food. So it is something of mine, you know, whether we could do something more locally to support with that. But then also about the networking and the shared learning. So as Naomi mentioned, that we have the Health and Wellbeing Network for our schools, which is for all health and wellbeing leads, and heads can also attend those meetings. They're currently run termly. Historically, they've been a lot around us just talking at them, but with this shift with Healthy Schools, we're inviting schools to come along and present and share and hopefully encourage some of that networking and sharing good practice. So our first meeting is actually in September, and we're actually being hosted at Halifax Academy, and they're going to actually discuss all their work around food. And they're really, I know for a fact they'll be going straight for gold with food and straight to being an ambassador, because they do want to share what they're doing. Some amazing stuff. And when I've spoke with them, because as I say, we've done it with schools, that some of the other schools, the smaller schools, say we can't do that, and they're saying it's not right. So it's another passion of mine to get all schools to kind of tap into those local assets. And I think you working with Halifax Academy, they can share the knowledge and help schools to achieve that. So there's definitely loads of work going on to support that. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you for that, Becky. Ben, would you like to come on there now, please?
Yeah, so first of all, I think I'd just like to say it's been a pleasure working with members on this, and I think it is a really excellent piece of work, and it gives us lots of things to take forward, actually, and I'm sure you'll come on to talk about what next. But just a couple of things from me as an officer, I think. First of all, I think the Halifax Academy stuff is brilliant. There's a question for me about whether we can do more about getting that out into the public domain. So it's not just about sharing with schools, but it's about actually, do we want to have a broader conversation with, for example, the Courier? Do we want to get something in the media about it as a positive response to cost of living crisis and the way that some of our anchor institutions are responding to that? Because I think it's a fantastic example. So, I'd like to make that offer to take that away and to have that conversation with the comms team, not necessarily for me to lead that. I think it's this isn't an officer report, this is a Scrutiny member-led report, and so my offer is to work with the Scrutiny leads who pull this together and with our comms team to do a bit around that, if that would be helpful. The second bit I wanted to mention is, so I really welcomed Will's comments actually around how do we think about this as not just in school, but take it further. And so there's an offer I think I'd like to make. Sorry, Becky, I'm going to nominate you without even asking you, but whether there's a conversation Will and Becky can have offline around that, and whether we can take anything forward about the youth offer and how we build that into the conversations Becky's having across the system around food and nutrition and how we do the best we can in Calderdale, and hopefully that will be useful to you, Will, to be able to feed into that and have Becky to take that forward for you in the system, because I think it's really important we do that. We've heard what you said, and I think we need to do something about it, and at least try and feed it into the discussions. The third bit for me, we've talked about cost of living crisis before, and I think there's something really important about the impact of the rising food prices on the provision of school meals and how we factor that into some of the discussions. So again, if the members would like me to do that, I'm happy to pick that conversation up with Sarah, who's leading a lot of that work, Sarah Richardson, who's leading a lot of that work in the council. And I think that clearly is as Lawrence has put it in the chat, there's a whole cross-cutting piece of work around that. But I think being able to feed in things like this, which isn't necessarily one of the first things that may spring to mind, but when people are thinking about cost of living, but is actually really important in terms of what schools can and can't provide. It's been in the news this week around, beef is off the menu now for schools. They can't afford beef anymore, can't afford chicken anymore, so they're having turkey. And actually, whilst beef isn't necessarily the most healthy thing, having a balanced diet is really important. And if you start losing some of the some of the food sources from that diet, it becomes unbalanced. And I think that's really important that we feed that into the discussions we're having around cost of living crisis and the impact of that on our system. That's it for me, Chair.
Thank you very much. I much appreciate those offers, Ben. I mean, I presume people like Diana Dot, you'll be very happy for Ben to take things to the comms team and things like that.
Absolutely.
I think we very much kindly accept your offers, please. We'd like to do something on that. Councillor Courtney, Sarah,
just very briefly, so just just one very, very quick thing about having beef off the menu is probably not a bad thing from a climate emergency point of view, because ruminants are particularly bad in terms of, but that's sort of a bit of a side issue. Just wanted to really pick up very quickly around the youth club thing. We do still have, so there is the sort of main youth provision, that sort of fixed place youth provision is at the Orange Box, and I know that there is a kitchen there and there is work there, so I think that there is scope there. I know that there's a kitchen and a cafe being run. I think when I visited it with my temporary children, young people's cabinet member hat on, that they sort of offer sort of food, I think, for sort of care leavers and young people in care. So I think that so if they're not doing something around specifically around sort of food generally, then maybe there's opportunity there. So definitely sort of hook up with them. Just wanted to say that.
Good, thank you for that.
Can I just say something really quickly, actually? Just again, thinking about what Will said and Ben said as well. With my Tobin hat on, I'd say there's always an opportunity to link in with things like Tobin Learning Centre and the Climate Challenge College around stuff like that as well, to try and make links so that we are going beyond schools and kind of thinking about how that could link with youth provision too, potentially.
Yep, good point. Thank you for that. I've got a couple of there's just been some very useful conversation there, without a doubt, and questions and responses. I've got a couple of sort of minor things. Things like in-school kitchens as opposed to not having a kitchen and bringing food in. A lot of primary schools can't run their own kitchens and things. Is that something which is looked at in this process? Because I wasn't really involved in it. And the other sort of vaguely linked to that is the sort of purchasing process, local sourcing, the cost effectiveness involved, and nutritional balance type things. I guess all those sort of issues were covered anyway. Have I missed that in the report, Diana?
Yeah, we didn't go into great detail in terms of putting all that down, partly because there was such a variety of provision in terms of what people had. So some schools did have to just buy everything in. They didn't have any option. They didn't really have
you feel you got no more control in that situation.
Yeah.
That's all.
And so in a way, what we were made very aware was just the huge range of circumstances that schools had. So some schools had kitchens, but they didn't have any control over what was actually being produced. So actually having the kitchen didn't necessarily give you that much more choice in some ways. And I think what we were very aware of, rather than saying, well, actually, ideally, it would be great if every school had this, that's not really the possibility. So I think we weren't really trying to say, this is our ideal. We were trying to say, well, how do we do the best thing with what there is? And I think the point you've made about in terms of purchasing and things, I think that's where things like a network and where more support would certainly be appreciated, and sharing good practice across different settings. Because I think some schools were much more confident around that. Some perhaps felt that they didn't have the time or the expertise or the knowledge. And if there are ways that we can share resources, it may even help in terms of finances potentially. If there are links made across schools, then there might be options which schools would choose to explore in terms of looking at suppliers perhaps jointly or something. Those are kind of probably slightly longer term things, but that's where I think building up that kind of network and that knowledge across the different settings is probably quite important. But that would probably take a little bit of time.
Fair enough. Thank you for that. Brenda, Councillor Menteith, you've got your hand up now.
in the report, it mentions about encouragement of staff to eat with the children at lunchtime. And I have to say, when I worked in schools, I always ate with the children at lunchtime. And it was a hugely beneficial experience, more for me than for them, because they talked about things that they would not normally talk about in front of a member of staff, because they just saw you sitting there eating with them, and they took that as a normal everyday occurrence. And because it was an everyday occurrence, they didn't feel inhibited by it. So I think that's a wonderful suggestion.
Yes, indeed. I like the sound of that. I can't see any other hands up, but Lauren, I think you wanted to come in because you were involved in this anyway, just as sort of final comments or something.
Just really briefly, Chair, thank you. Just to say thanks to all the members involved, and we had a lot of officers and partners around the table on a couple of scrutiny in a day sessions as well as a focus group, so a big thank you to them. I guess it's just an opportunity really just to say any final comments or amendments from members of the board, and just in terms of process, we'd be recommending this to Cabinet, and I think in terms of timescales, the next date would be August now because we'll have missed the July one. So that's all from me really, thank you.
Thank you for that, Lauren. And it leads on to me saying, well, you know, I think we're all very pleased with the quality of this report and the content and the whatever. There's a few comments and a significant number of things which are going to be taken away and will carry on from this report, which is excellent, particularly like Will's reminding us about things outside school as well, which we'll look into in detail, which is good. And as Lauren has just said, it's something which needs to go to Cabinet. So I'll make my plea again directly as you're not going to come to these meetings again, are you, Councillor? Councillor Courtney, please can you make sure this one gets listened to and taken seriously and taken on board, please? I'll get that, please. So
of course, yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for all those that were involved in it. Much appreciated and some good work done there. Thank you. Final item on the agenda, you'll be pleased to hear this evening. It's been quite a serious meeting, which is excellent. The final one is the work programme, which if Lauren would like to kick off on this one, please.
Sorry, Chair, I've just noticed Councillor Foster's got a hand. I don't know whether it's a legacy hand or a... I'll let you come in first.
No, it's a comment on the work programme, so I'll let Lauren go first and come in after that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you. Just to say that the version that members have got is the most up-to-date one. Since then, the Chair and Deputy have met with Calderdale CCG colleagues, and I think Councillor Evans and Councillor Tremaine, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but we've discussed the possibility of expanding the September meeting from Just Open Minds, which is an annual report that comes to this board, to include some other aspects on mental health and wellbeing. At the last meeting, a member proposed something on suicide prevention in young people, and also Councillor Rivron got in touch around neurodiversity. So sort of a really big one piece, one item agenda encompassing some of that and making sure that we have the reports. So we can work with officers to scope that out, but just to see what members' thoughts are on that. And also, sorry,
yes,
I'll
carry on. I'm butting in.
And also just to say the October meeting, we have an item coming on children missing in education and home education. So I think because Paul's leaving in August and Sue will be joining us, we thought September would be a good time to do that, have that first report. And I think Councillor Monteith and Councillor Rivron suggested that we might do that as a focus piece of work. So we're looking at building that in.
Good.
And I think those are the only updates, unless members have anything, of course, suggestions always welcome.
Absolutely. So we were talking about expanding that one on the more sort of mental health issues more broadly. Do people have any concerns about that? Do they think we're missing something out, or are you happy with us to do that? Is your comment, Dot, along that in that one, or is it something else that we've missed?
Something else.
Go on then.
It's just to make a request from SACRE that the annual report is brought to the meeting. It's a thing that we are supposed to do, and I think it's been missed a couple of years. So we really do need to bring it to the meeting. So either the December or the January meeting, whichever would fit, or possibly the March one. Maybe the January or March would be better. I'm not quite sure if it'll be. Can you remember, Sheila, when it'll be ready? Because I can't remember the exact date.
Yeah, the last report for the sort of last academic year was published round about December. So the work on the next report is going to start over the summer, and that will be agreed during the autumn term. So I declare an interest. I'm actually chair of SACRE. And I think we've missed the boat for this last academic year, and to have two coming, to have that one coming, it will be well out of date actually. So we're probably, if we could have one in the January or March of the next year to report on this academic year, that would be more beneficial, I think.
Yeah, because certainly my previous incumbency, we always had the SACRE report at CYP. So, we ought to replace that. So thank you for the reminder, Dot.
And if we can have it sort of regularly on the agenda for the early spring, then and build it into the system, that would be helpful as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comments on Lauren's modifications or updating, shall we say, of the work programme? We're really happy with what we're proposing. The only other thing that I had in that sort of context is that we have talked about the fact that about this meeting being on what's the word? Digitally or whatever, as opposed to face-to-face. And we've talked in the past about hybrid meetings, and because there are pros and cons of both sides on this, some people are very keen on the face-to-face, some people prefer the digital situation. And there's perhaps a middle between two ends here, because we do have people, if we go meet face-to-face, who have to come and turn up for 1 hour or half an hour in a 2-hour meeting and so on. They've got the travel. What we're really beginning to talk about here is the hybrid meeting side of things, and I've been chasing up Ian and Robin about this, and I've just had a response from Robin on the subject, and just to inform people, I suppose, generally, and it may apply to this group. He's said that I can advise you, i.e. me, you, that the technical work to enable effective use of hybrid meetings and involvement of the public when appropriate is reaching its conclusion, and the system will be fully in place shortly. I have asked today when that date will be confirmed, and I will let you know as soon as it is. So I just thought that was worth communicating to board members, because we have talked about it in the past, and we may want to consider the possibility of having a hybrid meeting once the equipment is in place to do it. Or you may say, no, we want to all meet face-to-face. So maybe that's something you might ponder on and feed back to us over the next few weeks, and perhaps pick it up at the next discussion on the work programme, unless anybody's got something specific to say at this point in time. No, that seems to have gobsmacked everybody, and it's probably a bit late in the meeting to start throwing it in, but I thought I'd update you on that. So if there's nothing else, thank you very much for everybody's input and your contributions. Some good sessions, some good questions, and